same thing that related to Paolo. Maybe we'll start a bit back with background.
Yeah. Okay. First of all, I think I have to thank you for the invitation, for being here. My first day in previous jobs has always been a class, while in research, which makes a huge difference in terms of landing. So a bit of my history, as you can understand from my name, accent, and possibly also look, I'm Italian. Originally from Palermo, South of Italy. I left Palermo a long time ago, I think 16 years ago, to go to Manchester School of Accounting and Finance with a Mercury Fellowship to study management control systems in large multinationals. That was the period in which I got interested in A&T. I did a lot of work on ERP implementations and used a lot of A&T to make sense of the mess of SAP and these kind of things. Stayed in Manchester for a few years, then went to Madrid, Carlos III, my first appointment as assistant professor, then Oxford Said for 6 years as a lecturer and then a reader, then IE Business School, and now I'm here. Normally I say that I leave the UK because of the weather, but I cannot really say that anymore given the climate. So there must be something that attracts me here. It's one of those trans-historical attractors that brings me back to the UK. The paper I'm going to present today is linked to my previous work. In a sense, it originates from my work on ERP implementations. And the idea is, SAP or these technologies are quite strange objects, as John Law mentioned, or referred to them. And so my interest was related to the fact, how is that these things that are not very well defined actually attract the user and engage the user. And so another interest of mine is on the accounting history, and in particular the history of accounting in the Society of Jesus. A bit of that comes by chance, but not entirely, because if you know a bit of accounting, the accruals were invented by a Jesuit accountant who actually worked in my hometown. He was not Palermitan, but he worked in Palermo in 16B. His book is published in 1636. And so I thought, okay, I can start thinking about these engagement processes by looking at how accounting books becomes books to be practiced. I mean, there's Adrian Jones, who is a historian of books, who says a book is a book only when it is read. If a book is on a shelf, it becomes a piece of furniture. So how is that this object attracts the interest of the user? And in that sense, I started to look at accounting books not for the content, but for the shape, for the object. I mean, at the book as an object. And in doing this work, I came across this picture here. So I was looking at how the structure of books, the layout, the various inventions in between the late medieval and early modern times made the approach to the book easier. And I came across this picture, which is a plan of a medieval church. It's in a fantastic book by America Brothers on rhetoric in Middle Ages. And the idea here is that you enter the church and you follow a path, and by following this path you get an illumination. So you go to the first chapel and maybe you look at some images. Then you go to another chapel, another space, and you touch the relics of the saints. And then maybe you go then to the center of the nave, you look up and you get another picture, then you confess your sins to a priest, to your confessor, and then at the end you get, if you do all these things correctly, you get a vision, you get a vision of truth, you get knowledge, you get a vision of God. Guess how this vision of God was called in early modern Italian? It was called theoria, a theory. okay? So, because it comes from God, so you get an illumination. This encounter, it was not a casual encounter, because at that time the church worked as a text that could be read by those who could not read books. So to be trained and to be catechized, if you like, rather than reading books, because people did not read books, you entered the church and you were brought into the world of the Catholic Church in this particular case. Of course, to read the images, I mean, if I enter a church, I would have a completely different experience compared to my mom. I mean, she's quite... she practices the Catholic Church quite a lot. I don't. And so I would look at the church for the beauty of the paintings. She will see these images, different kinds of things. So you have to be trained to read this text, to read this image, to read this space. That book by Mary Carruthers talks about the importance of rhetoric in medieval and early modern times. For constructing knowledge, for constructing visions of knowledge. In particular, she and another lady, another professor, Lina Bolzoni at the University of Pisa, the Normale in Pisa, they talk about rhetorical machines. Machines because they help to build knowledge. This church works as a rhetorical machine, where you have an organization in spaces. So you segment the space, then you move through these spaces, and you get an illumination. When I first saw this picture, I thought, oh, this is like a PhD in accounting and finance. You go and take a course in microeconomics, then you do finance 1, then you do finance 2, then you do maybe statistical methods, then you go back home. You have you have your dreams, which become nightmares in the moment in which you for a moment think that rational men are actually irrational. You go to your supervisor, you confess your sins, you say, "Oh, I thought that men were rational, but actually I dreamed last night that they are irrational." Go back and reread and then at the end you get this illumination. Now, the way in which they structured these spaces was very similar to the way in which they structured the books. So the invention of the table of contents, marginalia, chapters, they are all spaces that lead you through a certain path that leads to a theory, to an illumination, if you like. And Mary, she makes a difference between orthopraxis and orthodoxy. I mean, the way in which you create knowledge can happen or can be interpreted in two ways. Either the knowledge is in the text, or the knowledge happens through a process that you have to go through, which is this example. In Oxford, for instance, they say that a student reads the subjects. I read physics, I read economics and management, I read theology, because the idea is that you go to the library, you read the book, the truth is in the book. So that is a very medieval idea. Now, why am I telling you these things, and whether it's this title there of Accounting, Rhetoric and Memory? Because accounting, I've written another paper, 2009, which is published in the US, is intrinsically a rhetorical practice. No one had realized, or very few had realized, that, for instance, inventory, which is the core of the accounting practice, comes from inventio, which is the first canon of rhetoric, which, by the way, originates also the word invention. If you look at that book where the accruals were mentioned for the first time by Ludovico Flori, the Jesuit, the book is organized in three parts. The first part is dell'inventario, about the inventory. The second part is dell'ordinazione e disposizione dei conti, or the ordination and disposition of the accounts, which is the second canon of classical rhetoric, ordinatio and disposizione. The third part of the book is how to communicate the results of your accounts, and that is the style that you choose in the communication. There is the third canon of rhetoric, the elocutio. There are quite a few things that link accounting, rhetoric, and the art of memory. Record comes from ricordo, it means to remember. So all of these techniques that were devised in between late medieval and early modern times to aid orators, for instance, to remember their speeches, add also, a rhetoric was a way to shape the art of memory, but also there were quite a few interesting links between this kind of humanist knowledge with other knowledges that were emerging in that period, amongst which accounting. No one, for instance, remembers that or knows that when we talk about rationality, I mean, we think about reason. But actually, Il Libro della Ragione, the book of reason, was the ledger. So reason, ratio, meant account. It did not mean only reason. Calculus meant account, again, another space. And so when you do calculations, what you do is that you create spaces and then you create a series of spaces. So you do an inventory through accounts. And then when you do calculations, you reorder these accounts, and so you move them around and you do calculations. In fact, one Benedictine accountant in 1589, I think it was, 86, Pietra said that numbers are figures, numbers are pictures, and when you do calculations, you do calculations by moving these pictures around. And in fact, if you are an accountant, I doubt that there is one in this room apart from me. Are there any? No, it's not very popular to be an accountant. But if you are an accountant, when you had to organize your P&L, in your mind, you move the accounts and you reorganize your accounts. So accounting is a very visual practice, but not by chance. It's a very visual practice because it originates from the diffusion in other realms of very sophisticated and pervasive practices that were related to memory, art of memory, rhetoric, but also meditation. I mean, all of these things were devised to engage the user, where the user was a person who had to become a believer. Okay. So that is the idea. There are quite a few, I mean, things that are interesting in that book by America and others. For instance, this idea of imaginus agentes. I mean, these images, which could be, as I said, spaces, but also things that we nowadays use for organizing our knowledge without knowing their history. Like, for instance, we always do wheels. I mean, we put something in a like if you know something about management, the balance scorecard. You have a vision in the middle, and then you put some cards around it, and that defines the strategy. That is a rhetorical wheel, devised or invented or discussed by Orazio Toscanella in 1589. Trees, hierarchies, they are also rhetorical machines. And not only rhetorical machines, but also rhetorical machines that have religious origins. Hierarchy comes from hierus, that means sacred or priest, and arche, that means rule. So a hierarchy is a sacred rule. So there are lots of relationships which have been lost with time between rhetoric, art of memory, religious matters, and accounting. So what I was saying is that these images, these rhetorical machines, had never, I mean, they never had a representational purpose. I mean, they were not created for representations. They were created for actually the invention and reinvention of knowledge. I mean, in English you say reinventing the wheel. Reinventing the wheel means that you create a wheel and then you move the cards around and you are inventing new knowledge. So it's not reinventing the wheel in the sense that we're talking about the wheel of the card. We're talking about the rhetorical wheel and how we move the cards around. So that is the background a bit of this paper. So it is a paper that it's already published. And it's done. So now what I'm getting interested is developing a bit more this relationship between ratio and rationality, between visualizations and rationality. So how is that we, in a sense, if you go back to Weber and the debate on the emergence of modern capitalism, the idea of what counts as rational is a bit left at the margin of his explanation. So where does this rationality come from? So how is that certain things like in Weber's account, accounting was a way of showing that certain calculations were rational. But why does accounting provide this rationality to behaviors? Why is it supposed to be a rational way of doing things? Here, amongst these images that I've looked at, there is one that, in a sense, exemplifies this idea of orthopraxis. This is a graphical representation that the Jesuits have in their spiritual exercises. In spiritual exercises, they are divided in four weeks. The first week, the thing that you have to do is an inventory of yourself, and therefore you have to organize a series of examination of yourself on a daily basis. This is G stands for giorno, for day. Start from Monday and you end up on Sunday. The idea is that you do an analysis of yourself in the morning, and if you have committed a sin, you put a dot on the top line and you write your sin in the middle. Then in the end, normally you commit more sins during the night, you put your dots there and you write the sin there. And you see that the space for writing the sins diminishes. So in a sense you are supposed to improve your behavior by the end of the week. This is another rhetorical machine, in a sense. It's a way in which you construct an accountability of yourself by dividing you and yourself, by making you mirrored in a mirror like this. These are at the base of any control mechanism, creating a division between those who are controlled and those who are controlled. Now, what is interesting about this, and why am I talking about this? Because in this paper, one of the things that I want to do is to, in a sense, criticize the idea of institutional logics that is quite popular now in organization theory, where there are certain logics, like, for instance, the market ideology, or the healthcare logic, or whatever, and they shape behaviors of people. So universities in the past were about education, now they are about making money because a market logic is coming in. But these things are actually conceived as too solid, if you like, too concrete. These logics are much more complicated. And here, this is an example of how the Jesuits took into account this complication. So here, for instance, when the Jesuit had to do the accounting for sin, E, and at that time it was E and still it's E, E was the only one who could define what the sin was. And therefore, you could be a sinner in Rome, but not a sinner in Latin America. Because one key element of rhetorical practice is to have clear what your intention is. So depending on the intentions, you may have different forms of knowledge. So, and these things are always incomplete. This is what Karin Orsatina has been discussing for a while now. These systems of representation, be them accounting for sins, science, accounting, whatever, they are always incomplete representation. So you look at yourself there, but yourself is never complete, it's never perfect. And this is why she talks of structures of wanting and desire. You have a profit and loss account, you look at your firm through that profit and loss account, you see that you can improve, you don't like that picture, and you start wanting and desire something better for your firm. You look yourself in the mirror, you have a spot here, you do like this, the spot is gone, and then something actually worse comes, and you want for more. And so you look at that mirror more and more. That is for me a quite interesting theoretical conundrum, because in accounting we now know that transparency is not achievable. I mean, it's only lay people believe that accounting can offer transparent representations. We know that markets fail. We know that efficiency is a dream. These things, though, always fail. But the more they fail, the more we want them. I remember I was at Stanford a couple of years ago, and it was a seminar on the crisis of capitalism. And they put together two people. One was a professor of finance from the School of Business, and one was a Marxist economist. That they, you know, in the USA now that there are not many, so they have to go around and search for one. And so they put them together on the same table, and, you know, very interesting discussion. But at the end, the solution to the crisis of capitalism for the finance professor was more market. For the Marxist economist was more rules, more regulations, forgetting that both market and rules always fail. So how is that this concept, these ideas, always engage the user so much? So what kind of mechanisms of engagement they use to make us believe that they actually are the solution to our problems, while we know in every, you know, we have instances now that are of paramount importance showing that markets always fail. So the same thing goes for rationality. I mean, and this is why the paper is called The Unfolding Nature of Rationality. I mean, we always tend to solve our problems trying to get to a kind of rational approach to problems. I remember when I think I can mention the name. When Nigel Thrift was co-vice chancellor of research at the University of Oxford, I told him, look, Nigel, you are a postmodern geographer, but when you have to manage research at the University of Oxford, you go back to rationality. You go back to one single way of doing things, or there is a way of doing things. So how do you leave this contradiction in what you research and what you practice when you become a manager? So in a sense, one question for managers is also whether there is management outside rationality. And I think that there is, and actually the Jesuits are an interesting case to study. The question that I want to briefly discuss with this paper, how is that this continuous failure does not leave us in frustration and despair? So how is that these things always fail, and the structures of wanting and desire are always there to make us call for more representation, for more analysis, in a way that eventually we see the light and find the solution. So I think that the idea of epistemic object needs to be complemented with an idea of wanting and this. The structures of wanting and desire that Karen Orsatina mentioned in her work needs to be complemented by a structure of hope and belief. So we see that these things fail, but we always live with the hope that there will be something that will solve our solutions later. I remember another conference in California. It was on this initiative on rethinking capitalism, and there was an interesting talk given by a professor of art and politics. I can't remember his name now, but there are videos on the website. And he was making relationships between different periods of knowledge, modernity, enlightenment, postmodernity, and how different movements in ballet were thought. I mean, classical ballet, like this, God, you are perfectly perpendicular to God. Enlightenment, you like this. So there is hope that you find a solution. And then postmodern, ballet, there is no hope. Everything is gone. Right? So how is that we are always like this? So how is that we always try to find? Of course, not in STS circles, because we never do this, right? We actually do it. But normal people, I mean, they do. And here, what I think is that we need to explore the quasi-religious nature of management solutions, or finance solutions, of managerial techniques that manage to sell hope to those who are buying these products. And in the paper, what I do is to explore this quasi-religious nature of rationality. And what I do is, I was inspired by a book by Tony Grafton and Liz Jardine that is called From Humanism to the Humanities. What they say is that, and they're not the only ones, I mean also Peter Gallison to some extent, the historian of science, says something similar. They say that humanism at one point in time was so powerful that inspired many different other areas of knowledge. It is when humanism becomes humanities and therefore becomes a discipline that the power of humanities is lost. And they say that so some humanist techniques, in particular the tribune, so logic, grammar, and rhetoric, exploded and went into different realms to become forms of constructing and organizing knowledge in different areas, amongst which, for instance, economics, and this is what Dieter McCloskey talks about, or, for instance, accounting. What is the difference? What happens when humanism becomes humanities and humanist knowledge diffuses in other realms, no longer being related to the purpose for which it was invented? I mean, the humanism in the medieval times was a way of improving morals and moral judgment. So, for instance, the Jesuits utilized lots of rhetoric exactly for devising this ability of exert wise judgment. Their motto, one of their mottos was "Perinde ac cadaver esset," which means I have to behave as if I am a dead corpse. I don't have to be influenced by anything. So that is the only way in which I can make wise decisions. And for being indifferent, for fostering this indifference, there are tons of techniques, including the spiritual exercises that I mentioned before, including accounting. I mean, the accounting that the Jesuits had was technically different because of the this attention to wise judgment. While humanism was about improving morals and moral judgment, when it moves to other realms, these techniques that were about the organization of knowledge become something different, and they are then no longer aimed at improving morals and moral judgment, but they are there to produce information and skills. This is when those rhetorical machines, from machines that construct knowledge for very pragmatical purposes, become machines that construct representations for decision making. So that is a quite important watershed between, let's say, the history of I would say, Western cultures. For them, for Grafton and Jardine, I buy that argument quite a lot. One way that I want to do with you, what time do we want to?
Depends how long you want to have discussion.
I can finish in 10 minutes or 5 minutes. Or, so one thing that I want to do with you is going back to that idea of the spiritual exercises. In the spiritual exercises, one of the key rhetorical figures that shapes the spiritual exercise is this idea of ductus. Ductus is a path, like aqueductus. So you have a channel that channels you and your behavior along a path. And how is this path structured? So what are the features of a ductus as a rhetorical figure? The ductus is divided in 3 parts. The first part, you always do an inventory. So you can do an inventory of your sins, you do an inventory of your goods, you do an inventory of whatever you have to look at. And this is the example of the spiritual exercises. The second part relates to you are faced with a language of interrogation. So in a sense, you do an inventory and then you start to understand what different options you have. So in the spiritual exercises, you can think about being a sinner and and this would happen to you if you are a sinner, or you could actually do something else and then you see the light, you see the light of God. And no one, for instance, has thought that accounting standards, so the standards come again from some religious practice. In the spiritual exercises, when in the second part of this ductus, so the first one is the inventory, the second one is a language of interrogation where you have to find your way. The image that they use is that of following two banners, two standards. The standard of God versus the standard of Lucifer. Therefore, there are a series of things that in the exercises you have to do to understand which way you want to go. Okay, and so you inhabit that space in between God and Lucifer, and then in a sense you are pushed towards God. Where this idea of God, of course, is constructed by yourself, and therefore God is always absent and always made in the practice of searching for it. So the idea there in the rhetorical figure of ductus is that in the end you always see the light. So there is a hope there. By doing certain things, by doing inventory, by interrogating yourself on what you want to do, on where you want to go, and things like this, then eventually you see the light. This is exactly what happens with accounting techniques, but also with many different consultancy products which are sold on the market at the moment. So what you have, first thing that you do is an inventory. This is the inventory of that book by Lodovico Flori in 1636. Then you define some routes that you want to go for, and therefore you have options that you have to go for. And once you are in one part of the tree, you are no longer in the other. And at the end of this, you find the light, or at least you find an instrument that can prompt you towards a possible solution. This is a P&L of the Jesuits. I think it's 1676 or something like that, where you have profit and loss, and then if you have a loss, you can analyze why the loss is made, and therefore you are always left with the hope that there is a possible improvement to make sure that that loss eventually becomes profitable. So what I want to say in that paper, of course the paper is much richer than this brief presentation, is that accounting has mutated, if you like, or has translated from humanist techniques that were developed for instilling in the user hope and belief. And now we use these things without knowing why we are using them. So we use all of these rhetorical machines, the wheel, hierarchies, including accounting, without knowing that they were actually devised in late medieval and early modern times for meditation and religious purposes. So the practices are exactly the same, although they look different because they are applied to a different realm of interest. I don't know whether I want to do this. Possibly yes. If you remember that picture of the church, the way in which knowledge was constructed in that church was not only through the eyes. I mean, if you happen to be in Rome, go to the Chiesa Gesù, the main church of the Jesuits in Rome. And if you experience that space, one of the things that you will be doing is staying below the dome of the church, where there is a wonderful fresco by Pozzo, I think. So you stay in this very uncomfortable situation, and you follow the images. And because of this situation, of this position, you almost feel that you are fainting and you are taken up to God. Now, in a recent refurbishment of the church, a stupid architect put a mirror on the floor. so that the machine doesn't work anymore. So you do this and say, okay, nice, but it doesn't do anything. Gaining knowledge was a truly bodily experience. So for instance, why do we do this when we read books? You know?
Eating the words.
Almost eating the words. The functional modern explanation, you use this to turn the pages because with the saliva it's easier. No, it's a remnant of a series of techniques used to remember what you read, things when manuscripts were rare. I mean, when manuscripts were rare, you could read them in Bologna, Salamanca, Oxford, Cambridge, Paris. Okay, so you start from Palermo with a horse, boom, and you get killed in Reggio Calabria. And so it takes a long time to get there. Paper was expensive, so there were tons of techniques that were developed to remember things. One of which was putting perfume on a page, so that when you read the book, you were tasting, almost eating the words. Okay, so that when you were back at home with the same perfume, you could remember the concept that you were reading in that remote place in Bologna or wherever. And there are tons. There is a wonderful book on the history of reading as a practice by Paolo, which tells you tons of these tricks. This is why in the name of the rose, the priest, the monk, the Benedictine monk, dies when he reads the forbidden book. Because every intellectual would have been trained to do these things. Light a candle, do certain things, and ruminate, so that you can remember things and taste the book. So it was not by chance that he died. He died because that was the way in which they experienced and constructed knowledge in medieval times. Now, so normally, knowledge was never a visual thing. So how is that these numbers these numbers as figures, as pictures, became so powerful? This is a quite simplistic story, if you like, but most of this relates to the diffusion of Ramism in between the 1500 and 1600 in Europe. Peter Rams was a professor of logic, Aristotelian logic at the University of Paris, and he found very difficult to teach logic to his students. So what he did was to organize the entire Aristotelian logic in dichotomies. Of course, that was a huge simplification of Aristotelian logic, but he made it visible and clear. That is the moment in which the appeal, also because of the printing press, the appeal to the eye became quite important. And this is a book by, an accounting book by Thomas Brown, 1673. It's a big book, at Christchurch they have it. It's full of entries. There is only one page of written text and 2 folios in the middle, which is analysis of the accounts. And the guy says, if you understand this structure, you will understand how to keep the accounts. You will understand any single entry that is in the huge book. You don't need to do anything. You just go back to this, and you can then go trace this. Make the connection between the various problems that you have and the various way of accounting for them through double entry. So the visual became, let's say, cool in around that period, and possibly too cool, because this is, of course, the part of a process in which you operate a huge simplification, also to prompt a process of commodification. We nowadays consume accounting numbers as if we eat bananas and things of that kind. So, what can we learn from this? I think that we can learn a couple of things. I mean, one of the things I want to say is that rationality is the outcome of a process of a secularization of human practice. I mean, if we go back to the previous slide, that is modern purification using Latour's word upward. So you take, if you like, the very complex Aristotelian logic, you simplify it in order to sell it to your students. This is what happens with accounting too. And so what we have is the victory, in a sense, of humanism, but the victory of humanism, which is also its death, because it becomes a very stupid technique, no longer aimed at creating wise people and wise students, but stupid people and stupid students who are able to do anything without knowing what they are doing, actually. Second thing, and this is what I just said, it's interesting that once these techniques are no longer related to moral issues, but are related to how to do things, there is an important separation that happens there, and a new morality there. Because while before you use these techniques to then discuss moral issues which were outside the technique itself, now, once these techniques are no longer used for debating and improving your morals, but actually for representing things, if you are good at representing these things, what happens is that your morality becomes equal to mastering the skill. This is why what is rational becomes just. This is why what is useful becomes just. Because if you are able to understand economics formula, there is nothing outside it, and therefore what is useful, what is said to be in line with a utility function becomes what is just, and so the two things actually are isomorphic. So there is nothing outside the model itself. And then the last thing that I want to say is this idea of, in a sense, rationality being being the result of very simplistic processes of representation, that because use religious and meditative practice of engagement, rationality is always there to reinvent itself, and therefore this is why I think in my view market, rationality, transparency, efficiency, all of these things are categories that in a sense are very difficult to beat because they are very religious in their nature. Okay? So I'll stop here so that I can leave some time, if there is time, to for questions, and thanks a lot for your attention. I told you that, actually I didn't tell you, I'm an accountant, but it's a joke. I mean, I do accounting as a way of investigating other kinds of problems, which I hope relates to some of the problems that you are investigating.